Hey, how you doing, man?
All streets! All streets! All streets! All square! All square! All square! All square! All streets! Who's democracy? All democracy! Who's grass? All square! Who's grass? All grass! Who's grass? All grass! All square! We want to get all square! All square! All square! All square! All square! All democracy! All democracy! Who's square? All square!
Right, please keep off the grass.
Hey, how you
This is
doing?
sacred grass. Keep off the grass. You've got to be protected. Right. Don't stand and watch. Don't stand on, please. Make little participate and get involved.
Yeah. Why would you bother? You just go home. It looks like a 19-year-old Stasi as well, doesn't he?
I said, can you hear at the back? Yes. They can't? Yeah, go for it. You sort that out. Mic check!
Mic check!
So that the people in the back can hear us, I want you all to repeat back to me what I say, so I'll do it in small clips. So, mic check!
Mic check!
Can everybody welcome?
Can everybody welcome
Tom from Campaign Against the Arms Trade.
Tom from the Campaigns from the Arms Trade?
Okay. Repeat back.
Repeat back.
Campaign Against Arms Trade.
Campaign against arms trade.
Is here in solidarity.
Is here in solidarity
With CND.
with CND
And all those who oppose the renewal of Trident.
and all those who oppose the renewal of Trident.
We support cuts in military spending,
We support cuts in military spending,
if any at all.
if any at all.
We also stand in solidarity with occupied democracy
We also stand in solidarity with occupied democracy.
to say there is a democratic deficit in this country.
Who say there's a democratic deficit in this country?
But what goes on over there does not represent our public interest.
And what goes on over there does not represent our public interest.
But that's not what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Campaign Against Arms Trade. If we've established that you can hear, maybe you don't need to keep repeating back, or we might be here for a while. So what is Campaign Against Arms Trade? Campaign Against Arms Trade was formed off the back of peace groups like CND, other groups who oppose military spending. But our focus is something slightly different. It's the commercial arms trade. And I'm sure a lot of you are aware of what this is, but I'm just going to talk about it for a second for anyone who isn't. So the commercial arms trade is private sector companies, it is huge corporations building weapons, building equipment for death and destruction, be it small arms, rifles, submachine guns that are produced by companies like Heckler and Koch in Nottingham, or be it fine engineering for components for drones or energy-seeking weapons that are shipped off around the world, and it is the trade between those private companies and foreign governments. But it's supported by our government, by the UK government. In theory, their role is to regulate arms sales, to regulate this trade. But in reality, they're actively promoting it. There's a government department called UK TIDSOs, Defence and Security. They employ 128 people to promote arms sales between UK companies. And British arms trade is shrouded in secrecy and in hegemonic rhetoric. They attempt to justify it. They say that it's democratic, that it's in our public interest.
What's the amount?
We're here today to debunk that. We're here today to argue that the arms trade is not democratic, that you can either promote democracy or you can sell arms, that you can talk about human rights or you can wage wars. You cannot do both. The UK claims that it has the strongest arms export controls in the world, so there's nothing wrong with the arms it sells. They're in our public interest. We'll take a moment to deconstruct that idea. This might be true on paper. In theory, we don't sell weapons if they're to be used for internal repression against civilians or for external aggression against other countries. But in reality, over 10,000 arms export licenses are approved every year, and they are indiscriminate in who they are approved to. Around 200 are turned down, that's it. And these appear to be done only arbitrarily or in the commercial interest, not in the needs of peace. So, every year the Foreign Office produces a list of countries of concern, countries that are engaged in human rights abuses, that are waging war, are in conflict or oppressing their own civilians. There's a list of 28 countries that the Foreign Office has concerns about. We sell weapons to 18 countries on that list currently. Just take a moment to digest that. How does it make sense? Just in the last 6 months, in the first 6 months of 2014, in fact, we sold over £60 million worth of weapons to countries that we know are abusing human rights within those countries.
Our country's abusing human rights. We're the biggest arms dealer on the planet.
Precisely. That's just stuff. That's just equipment that we know 100% will be used in war. It's billions more for what's called dual use technical equipment, which also will be used in wars. We need to send the message that this is not democratic. It is not in our interest. In Israel, we have armed the Israeli state as civilians are killed, and it's done in our name. The government itself recognised that 12 arms export licenses referred to equipment that was used in the bombardment of Gaza, but they have not revoked licenses. They're prepared for weapons to continue to flow from the UK to Israel. In Hong Kong, in October, democracy protesters like us, students, civilians, took to the streets to argue that elections were unjust, to argue that the democratic process was not fair. They were non-violent. They were met with violence by police in Hong Kong, and they were tear gassed. That tear gas was supplied by British companies. We have not revoked arms export licenses to Hong Kong as a result. They argue that this was public policing as opposed to internal repression. Can anyone here tell me what the difference is? Because I don't know. And then we look to our biggest customer. The biggest customer of British weapons is Saudi Arabia. An authoritarian dictatorship. Saudi Arabia, where just in the last few weeks we've seen again jail and corporal punishment for those who are prepared to speak out against the government. Saudi Arabia that beheaded 87 people in 2014 and already 10 in 2015. And Saudi Arabia accrues these weapons but barely uses them. When was the last time they used them? In 2011, against democracy protesters in Bahrain. Again, British weapons were used to oppress those seeking to further the aims of democracy. What message does our government send when it supports these regimes that are actively stalling the democratic process? We'll look at another argument that they use in support of the arms sales. They say it's in our interests. They say it's national security. They call it defence. But it's not defence if you're the ones waging war or if you're the ones arming half the world so that they can wage war. And what are the real security threats? Some are military, but by supporting militarism, we are upholding those military threats. Weapons have a long life. Time and time again, Britain has sold weapons to regimes that only years or even months later it is then against. It is not in our security interests to be arming the world. Our security interests are issues like inequality, energy security, and climate change. This is human security, public security that affects you, affects me, affects all of us. And the government's own reviews, its own research and the national security strategy identify that these are threats, yet its policies only recognise the military context. And it continues to arm the world and uphold the interests of profit and of geopolitical power above the interests of democracy. We at Campaign Against Arms Trade want to reclaim the idea of security. We want all of you to join us in rewriting security policy, a security policy that works for all of us. Currently, security is just another kind of socialism for the rich. They support their own interests, the interests of the companies involved, and the relationships between our supposed government and dictators across the world. I'll say again, and I want you to join me. We can talk about human rights.
We can talk about human rights.
Or we can sell arms.
Or we can sell arms.
We can talk about democracy.
We can talk about democracy.
Or we can wage wars.
Or we can wage wars.
Together now, we cannot.
We cannot.
Do both.
Both.
Thank you. I'm going to hand you over to Matt, also from Campaign Against Arms Trade, to talk about our alternative security. Thank you very much.
We need to emphasise the fact that while we are subsidising arm companies by hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds a year, by exporting death and destruction, we're not just harming pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong or Palestinians in Gaza. The arms trade also damages us in the UK, because while the government protects the military budget, it's slashing vital public services like housing, health, education. And it's astonishing. Last year, 1 million people used food banks. 1 in 4 children suffers from poverty. And while we are spending money for military technology that we don't need, overpriced fighter jets, for civil servants to travel around the world to sign dodgy arms deals. I like to use the image of a leaky bucket. It's as if we're putting loads and loads of resources into a bucket, and this bucket just never gets fuller, no matter how much we put into it. And one argument that the government uses to justify the arms trade is the jobs argument. They'll say, oh, we need to give money to these companies because it promotes employment, it's good for jobs, it's good for the economy. And this is the only argument that the UK public will accept when it comes to selling arms. Not because it's true, but because they believe it. So this is one argument that we need to expose for what it is. False. It's a myth. There's about 150,000 people that work for the UK arms trade. And while this is not a number that can be dismissed, it only represents 0.7% of the total UK workforce. We need to assume that these are people who've got skills, engineering skills, that the UK needs as a country. There's a vital need for these skills. And these skills could be better employed for sectors and industries which have got more potential in terms of growth and jobs. The actual president of the UK Trade Association for the arms industry said that the UK trade arms sector is flatlining at best. There's no future. There's no future for these jobs. We need to invest, we need to shift these priorities, we need to shift the money that the taxpayers are giving towards these companies, towards industries that have growth potential. We've got here a map that we've come up with the number of jobs that we could create if we shifted the money that we're currently used for the arms trade. And it's about double the amount of the current jobs that we have at the moment. So if you want to share this around.
Pass this around to the
We're talking about shifting priorities that are deeply entrenched. They've been entrenched for decades. And it's not going to shift. But we need to work together. We need to work with trade unions. We need to do direct actions. We need to campaign against museums and public institutions that take money from arm companies. We need to change what they think is the priority for national security. We need to have a human security approach.
I just